The air in the penthouse office of Elias Thorne smelled of old drafting paper, fine scotch, and the dusty residue of 70 years spent building skylines. Elias, the legendary architect whose towers defined the postmodern Chicago silhouette, was not yet dead, but he was certainly fading. At 85, a recent, debilitating stroke had turned his once commanding presence into a fragile shadow confined to a customized leather armchair overlooking Lake Michigan. The focus of his fading days was the massive, framed blueprint resting on an easel by the window, the Thorne Tower. It was his final, unfinished masterpiece, a historical landmark skyscraper in the heart of the Loop, currently awaiting final transfer of ownership to the new legal entity managing its operations. The tower was Elias's life insurance, his legacy, and the crown jewel of an estate worth hundreds of millions. His son, Julian Thorne, now managed the day-to-day affairs. Julian was handsome, slick, and possessed a talent for negotiation, but he lacked the core architectural brilliance that defined his father. He was, fundamentally, a financial manager with a cosmetic architecture license, a detail Elias had always tolerated until his health failed. Julian's wife, Serafina, was a socialite with a bottomless need for high-profile validation, viewing the Thorne name and fortune as her birthright. Julian and Serafina had moved into the penthouse suite of the adjacent Thorne building 3 months ago, ostensibly to care for Elias. Like the previous story, the care quickly morphed into control. They managed his doctors, restricted his visitors, and, most importantly, controlled all correspondence with Elias's longtime legal counsel, Mr. Abernathy. Elias had always made it clear that Julian would inherit everything. However, his deteriorating health had not dimmed his mind, and he had recently begun to notice irregularities in Julian's handling of the Thorne Tower's final, complex legal arrangements. The first sign of true betrayal came 2 weeks before the final scheduled transfer date of the Thorne Tower. Elias had weekly requested to review the original partnership contract for the tower, a deeply complex document that outlined the intellectual property rights and the final ownership structure. The original contract, Julian. The one with the handwritten amendments from '98. I need to see the IP clauses, Elias croaked, his voice strained from disuse. Julian had been arranging a collection of ancient, priceless architectural sketches on the office wall, preparing them for an auction Serafina was planning. He paused, his back to his father, and offered a dismissive laugh. Dad, you don't need to worry about ancient contracts. I'm the legal executor here. It's all digitized, streamlined, and ready for transfer. The IP is secured under the new holding LLC. You need to rest, not read dusty, complicated legal jargon. I want the physical document, Julian, Elias insisted, his voice hardening with the authority he hadn't used in months. Bring it to me. Now. Julian turned, his smile frozen and strained. It's at Abernathy's office, Dad. Sealed. I'll get it next week. He never did. Elias knew the truth immediately, Julian was lying. The physical contract was always kept in the safe behind the Renaissance tapestry in this very office. Julian's refusal wasn't about convenience, it was about concealment. Julian was clearly trying to transfer the Thorne Tower's ownership using compromised or fraudulent paperwork, likely leveraging his father's weakened state. The second, far more painful confirmation came from Serafina. She was in the living area, overseeing the removal of a massive, custom-built library that housed Elias's beloved collection of first-edition architectural texts. Honestly, Elias, this mahogany monstrosity is depressing, Serafina sniffed, waving dismissively at the empty wall. Julian says once the tower is settled, we'll sell this place and buy a minimalist condo in Miami. No more dust, no more history, just clean lines and ocean views. This Chicago gloom is simply not chic. Her careless comment revealed Julian's true intention, not to preserve the legacy, but to liquidate it for a quick, opulent retirement, regardless of Elias's health. That night, Elias stared at the framed blueprint of the Thorne Tower. He realized that the greatest betrayal wasn't the theft of the money, but the desecration of his life's work. Julian was not just a greedy son, he was a fraudulent architect who would turn his father's enduring monument into nothing more than a profitable commodity. his anger, cold and sharp, cut through his physical fatigue. He had always been a master planner, a man who designed not just buildings, but contingency foundations. Julian had forgotten that his father, the grandmaster of structural design, always built a failsafe into his most valuable work. Julian was aware of Elias's primary will, which designated him as the sole heir. But years ago, after a bitter argument with Julian over his fraudulent professional path, Elias had executed a secret codicil of artistic integrity. This codicil was locked away with Abernathy, and it contained a devastating provision: if Julian ever attempted to misappropriate, compromise, or fraudulently benefit from Elias's artistic legacy, the tower's ownership would be immediately nullified from his inheritance. The contingency beneficiary was not Julian. It was Dr. Anya Sharma, Elias's estranged former protégée, a woman of uncompromising artistic integrity whom Julian had professionally destroyed years ago. Elias smiled weakly, pulling out a hidden, specially encrypted satellite phone hidden within the cushions of his armchair. He might be confined, but he was not silent. He had one task left: to ensure Julian's destruction was total and that Anya Sharma's integrity was finally rewarded. The blueprint of betrayal was about to be executed. The penthouse, which had once felt like a sanctuary of high art and intellectual pursuit, now felt like a gilded tomb overseen by vultures. Julian and Serafina had amplified their control, using Elias's physical fragility as an airtight excuse to manage every interaction. Elias, sitting immobilized, was an unwilling spectator to the dismantling of his life. The critical legal maneuver took place 3 days after Elias's request for the original partnership contract was denied. It was a Saturday morning, the office sealed off under the pretense of deep cleaning. Elias watched from his armchair as Julian, dressed in a sharp, unnecessary suit, meticulously laid out a series of legal documents on the immense black glass table. Serafina was hovering, applying a nervous, damp cloth to the edges of the table. "Are you certain this signature is believable, Julian? Your father's hand is so distinct." Julian offered a condescending sigh. "It's a digitally rendered overlay of his signature from 5 years ago, Serafina. Completely clean, completely plausible. The bank is using the power of attorney I filed months ago, claiming executive oversight due to his illness. They just need the paper trail to finalize the transfer of the tower's IP into the new holding company we control." He picked up a heavy Mont Blanc pen and, with a few confident strokes, forged his father's flowing script onto the final page of the transfer agreement. The scratch of the pen against the high-quality paper was the sound of Julian signing away Elias's legacy to himself. "It's done," Julian announced, his voice thick with triumph. He held the document aloft, a satisfied glint in his eye. "The tower is effectively ours. The transfer is complete, the old contracts are superseded, and the estate will be liquidated quickly once Dad stabilizes. We've secured the IP, the land rights, and the future revenue streams. Let the world celebrate his legacy, we'll be enjoying the profits." Elias felt a deep, sickening lurch in his chest, far worse than any cardiac spasm. Julian hadn't just changed the will, he had actively stolen the lifeblood of the company and the essence of his father's artistic contribution, using his legal skills and a fraudulent signature to perform an intellectual property heist. As Julian and Serafina retreated to the adjacent kitchen to celebrate their coup with expensive champagne, Elias knew the time for waiting was over. He needed to contact Mr. Abernathy and activate the codicil of artistic integrity now. He reached carefully beneath the cushioning of his armchair, his fingers finding the familiar, hard casing of the encrypted satellite phone. It was powered by a hidden battery pack and bypassed all the penthouse's digital surveillance. It was his last, secure line to the outside world. He dialed Abernathy's private, untraceable number. The call connected instantly. "Mr. Abernathy. It's Elias. You must activate the contingency." Elias's voice was strained, hoarse with effort, but the authority was unmistakable. "Elias. I'm relieved to hear from you. We've been worried. Julian has been intercepting all communication." Abernathy's voice was sharp with concern. "I know. He just completed the tower transfer paperwork, it's fraudulent. forged my signature, used the compromised power of attorney. He's liquidating the legacy. I need you to understand, this is no longer about the money. This is about architectural integrity. Julian has disgraced my life's work with his fraudulent license. Understood. The codicil of artistic integrity, sealed in 2019, is ready for deployment. The primary heir, Julian, is instantly disqualified if the primary assets are compromised. The asset will then transfer to the contingent beneficiary, Dr. Anya Sharma. Wait, Elias interjected, taking a shaky breath. I added a further, crucial stipulation to that codicil, George. I want him ruined, not just disinherited. Read the final clause to me. Abernathy paused, the sound of rustling paper audible over the secure line. He read the final, complex provision. The ownership of the Thorn Tower, including all associated intellectual property and future revenue streams, shall irrevocably transfer to Dr. Anya Sharma, only upon the contingent condition that Julian Thorn publicly and legally renounce the validity of his architectural license, acknowledging it was obtained by fraudulent means, and issuing a public apology for misrepresenting his professional credentials to the firm and the world. Elias confirmed, that's the clause. It must be a public renouncement of his professional fraud. That's the payback, George. Julian thinks he's a mastermind. I'm forcing him to destroy his entire identity just to save the asset. He will have to choose between keeping the tower, which he can't, or saving his professional facade, which he can't either. Abernathy was silent for a moment, clearly absorbing the ruthless genius of the move. Elias, that is, a devastating legal trap. If the codicil is activated, Julian faces a double bind, deny the codicil and lose the tower in a legal battle exposing his fraud, or fulfill the condition and publicly admit his fraud, losing his career entirely. He can't win. Exactly. Now, listen. Julian will announce my death in 2 days, Christmas Day. He will present his fraudulent transfer papers as the final legal word. I need you to arrive precisely at that moment. And George, find Anya Sharma. Tell her nothing, but prepare her for the storm. Her integrity is about to be rewarded. Elias, his energy completely spent, ended the call. He lowered the phone back into its hiding place just as Julian and Serafina burst back into the room, their faces flushed with celebratory wine. We're having the old Thorn Tower plaque completely refurbished, Dad, Julian boasted, oblivious to the call that had just ruined him. It'll say managed by Thorn and Vance Holdings. Doesn't that sound much cleaner than just Elias Thorn architecture? Elias simply closed his eyes, offering a weak, silent nod. Vance Holdings, he thought, referencing Serafina's family name. They had erased him from his own tower. But soon, the world would learn that the blueprint of his final structure was not a physical drawing, but the flawless, devastating legal trap he had just sprung. The week leading up to the final transfer date, scheduled for Christmas Day to coincide with Julian's orchestrated announcement of Elias's irreversible decline, was marked by a breathtaking display of hubris. Julian and Serafina acted as if the ownership of the Thorn Tower had already been legally confirmed. Serafina organized a high-profile appraisal and preview party in the penthouse, inviting key figures from Chicago's real estate and social scenes. The event was explicitly designed to establish her and Julian as the new arbiters of the Thorn legacy, pushing Elias, the actual patriarch, into the background. Elias was wheeled out to the periphery of the vast living room, ostensibly to enjoy the company. In reality, he was placed there as a visible piece of declining furniture, a stark contrast to the vibrant, ambitious energy of his son and daughter-in-law. Julian, dressed in a custom-tailored suit, gave an eloquent, sweeping speech to the assembled guests, standing right in front of the framed blueprint of the Thorn Tower. My father, Elias Thorn, is a titan, Julian announced, his voice ringing with false reverence. But the mantle of legacy requires vision, scalability, and modern legal structuring. Effective today, I am restructuring the entire Thorn portfolio. The Thorn Tower, our crown jewel, will be rebranded, no more dusty, artistic sentiment. It will be an efficient, revenue-generating machine. He looked straight at his father, his eyes devoid of emotion. My father is, tragically, no longer capable of managing an asset of this magnitude. It falls to me, as the executor of his health and his future, to ensure its seamless, profitable transition. Serafina followed, outlining her plans to auction Elias's most valuable architectural sketches to finance a complete modernization of the tower's public spaces. We are stripping the lobby of its dated, dark granite. We're replacing it with glass and light. Think Miami, not Chicago. A sleek, international style. We will erase the heavy hand of the past and embrace the minimalism of the future. With every word, they were publicly erasing Elias's decades of work and aesthetic philosophy. Elias, unable to speak or move without significant effort, was forced to listen, his fury a cold, silent fire. He noticed that Julian, in his excitement, had left the heavy Mont Blanc pen, the very one used to forge his signature, carelessly resting on the blueprint easel. That night, after the guests departed and the staff had cleaned, Elias managed his second crucial covert move. He had secretly installed a hidden, miniature camera/microphone inside the frame of the blueprint easel months ago, designed to capture any activity related to the tower's final blueprints. He had worried about industrial espionage, never about familial betrayal. He waited until 2 a.m., when he heard Julian and Serafina return from their late-night victory celebration. They entered the office, slightly tipsy, and began discussing the final steps of their theft. The transfer is set for noon tomorrow, Julian. I've alerted the press to expect an announcement regarding Elias's health at 1 p.m., Serafina giggled. Once that's done, and the tower is legally ours, we'll celebrate with the funds. Julian scoffed. I can't believe how easy it was, Serafina. Abernathy is old and compliant. And Dad, well, Dad is a ghost. He never once asked about the codicil. He never questioned the validity of my license. He just trusts the Thorn name. Julian walked over to the easel, picked up the Mont Blanc pen, and playfully demonstrated the forgery. See? A slight flourish here, a little pressure there. Elias Thorn approved. He laughed, completely unaware that the hidden device was capturing every word, every sound, and the clear visual evidence of the forging instrument and the blueprint itself. This recording would serve as irrefutable proof of the attempted felony. Elias knew he had secured the necessary evidence. Now, he had to ensure the final player was in position. The next morning, using the encrypted phone and exploiting a 5-minute window when his nurse stepped away, Elias made a hurried, final call to Mr. Abernathy. George, the tower transfer is set for noon today. Deploy the codicil precisely at 12:30 p.m. I need Anya Sharma there, not for the reading, but for the aftermath. She must be present when Julian realizes the condition of his inheritance. I have her on standby, Elias, Abernathy confirmed. She is flying in from London this morning. She believes she is here to discuss an archival project. She has no idea she is about to inherit a skyscraper. Perfect. One more thing, George. The public denouncement of Julian's license, the final clause. I want to ensure every major architectural and legal firm in the city is notified before the public statement. Leak the information right after you present the codicil, before Julian has a chance to cover his tracks. Consider it done, Elias. The announcement will be timed perfectly. Julian will be ruined before the day is out. Elias hung up, his heart pounding, yet a profound sense of peace settling over him. He knew the risk he was taking. His strategic collapse needed to be perfect to ensure Julian made the final, fatal mistake of celebrating his fraudulent victory. He closed his eyes, thinking of Anya. She had been exiled from the architecture world years ago after Julian maliciously undermined her career to cover his own ethical shortcuts. Today, Elias would restore her legacy, and in doing so, he would fully obliterate Julian's. The final, perfect structural defense had been prepared. He was ready for Christmas Day. Christmas Day, the date Elias had marked for Julian's ruin, arrived cold and clear over Lake Michigan. The penthouse was filled not with family warmth, but with the cold, brittle energy of a high-stakes transaction. The final legal transfer of the Thorn Tower's ownership and IP was scheduled for precisely noon. Elias, dressed in fresh but austere pajamas, was strategically placed in his armchair by the window, facing the large screen where the virtual closing would be conducted. He had received his usual minimal morning care, which now consisted primarily of ensuring he was quiet and presentable. He felt weak, yet centered. His physical fragility was now his greatest tool. At 11:45 a.m., Julian entered the office, accompanied by a notary and Dr. Alastair Finch, a man Julian had hired months ago, known in certain circles for his compliant ethics and willingness to sign off on inconvenient paperwork. Serafina stood by the fireplace, sipping a mimosa, her eyes glittering with impatient triumph. Julian, his face flushed with nervous excitement, addressed his father with strained formality. "Dad, this is it. The final, essential paperwork transferring the legacy assets into the new holding trust. Dr. Finch is here to confirm your state of mind, which, we all agree, is currently incapacitated." Dr. Finch stepped forward, his stethoscope barely touching Elias's chest before he retreated. Cardiac rhythms remain stable, but the patient exhibits signs of severe cognitive decline and inability to process complex legal decisions. "I confirm Mr. Thorne is incapable of granting autonomous consent." He scribbled his signature with practiced speed, officially declaring Elias legally incompetent. The notary then finalized the remote signatures for the holding company and the partners, using the documents that bore the forgery of Elias's signature. At 12:05 p.m., a digitized, triumphant message flashed across the screen: "Thorn Tower IP transfer complete." Julian didn't need to wait for the official reading of the will, the asset was secured. The tower, Elias's masterpiece, was now under Julian and Serafina's corporate control. Serafina let out a squeal of delight and rushed to Julian. "It's done. We are the owners. We did it, Julian." Elias watched them, his expression neutral. He knew this was the moment to initiate the collapse. He needed to simulate a medical crisis severe enough for Julian to believe he was either dead or permanently comatose, a status that would simplify the probate of the real will and, critically, stop Julian from calling paramedics who might revive him before the lawyer arrived. With agonizing effort, Elias shifted his focus, inducing a rapid, shallow breathing pattern, a difficult but achievable trick for a man who had lived for years managing his own heart conditions. He allowed his eyes to roll back slightly, his head tilting to one side, completely slackening his posture. He looked utterly vacant, suddenly lifeless. Julian, mid-celebratory embrace with Serafina, was the first to notice. He strode over, annoyed by the timing of the disturbance. He placed 2 fingers against Elias's carotid artery, feeling for the faint, manipulated pulse. "Is he?" Serafina whispered, her voice laced with fearful excitement. Julian straightened, his initial shock quickly replaced by cold, legal calculation. "He's gone. Or as good as." Profound shock, cardiac arrest. "Serafina, don't call anyone." "Not yet. Dr. Finch has already signed the incapacitation papers. If we call 911 now, they'll want an autopsy, they'll ask questions about the transfer timing. We must control the narrative." He turned to the notary and the doctor. "Gentlemen, you saw the unfortunate passing. Natural causes, cardiac failure, moments after the legal conclusion of the tower transfer. This is tragic, but clean. I need you both to leave immediately and remain silent about the timing until I issue the official statement at 1 p.m. Dr. Finch, paid handsomely for his compliance, gathered his bag and nodded tersely, departing with the notary. Julian was now alone with Serafina, basking in their dark success. He pulled out his phone, ready to notify the family and the press. "It's ours, Julian," Serafina whispered, walking over to the blueprint easel, running her fingers over the forged signature. "No more old man, no more dusty architecture. We sell this place, we liquidate the sketch collection, and we start designing our own life." Julian smiled, a wolfish, predatory grin. He opened his mouth to make the call that would officially declare his father dead and his inheritance secured. He reached for his briefcase containing the fraudulent will and the proof of the tower transfer. But just as he placed his finger on the phone screen to dial the PR firm, the massive, custom-made oak door to the office was rattled by a sharp, authoritative knock. The sound was insistent, echoing through the large, silent office. Julian frowned, annoyed by the interruption. He opened the door to find a group of 3 severe-looking men standing in the hallway, their faces unreadable, led by a single, familiar figure holding a leather briefcase. "Julian," the man stated, his voice a low, heavy bass note. "I apologize for the intrusion on this difficult day. I am Mr. Abernathy. I am here representing the now-deceased Mr. Elias Thorne. I have instructions regarding a crucial codicil that must be executed immediately." Julian's face went white. He was staring not at a ghost, but at the executor of his absolute ruin. His premature victory had lasted all of 3 minutes. He had declared his father dead and secured the fraudulent transfer, giving Abernathy the perfect, irreversible trigger to deploy the codicil of artistic integrity. The moment Mr. Abernathy stood in the doorway, the vast penthouse office seemed to shrink, trapping Julian and Serafina in a sudden, cold spotlight. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The expensive champagne he had just consumed turned to ash in his throat. "Mr. Abernathy, I don't understand," Julian stammered, gesturing wildly at his father's motionless body. "This is a private matter. My father just passed away. The estate affairs are being handled by me, as the sole heir and executor under his primary will." Abernathy did not move, his eyes locked on Julian with a chilling intensity. He held up a sealed, red folder. "The primary will you refer to, Julian, is currently being superseded. Mr. Thorne had a profound concern for the artistic integrity of his final masterpiece, the Thorne Tower. I am here to execute a codicil designed precisely to protect that legacy from compromise." Serafina rushed forward, her socialite facade cracking into aggressive panic. "Compromise? We just legally secured the tower. It's in our holding company. You can't touch it. Show us the codicil, it's invalid." Elias was mentally unstable when he wrote that years ago. "The codicil is fully validated, witnessed, and notarized," Abernathy stated calmly. "And I must inform you that any attempt by you or Julian to move forward with the liquidation or structural alteration of the Thorne Tower will constitute a felony, as the ownership has just been transferred." "Transferred? To whom?" Julian demanded, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "I'm his only son. I have a valid architectural license." Abernathy ignored the license claim. He opened the red folder and began to read, his voice clear and resonant. "I, Elias Thorne, being of sound mind, hereby stipulate that if my primary asset, the Thorne Tower, including its intellectual property and future revenues, is fraudulently transferred, compromised for liquidation, or legally superseded without my explicit, living consent, the entirety of that asset shall be immediately and irrevocably detached from the main estate." Julian was breathing hard, sweating through his custom shirt. "Detached? So what? It goes to charity? A museum? We can fight that." "Not a charity, Julian. The beneficiary is a fellow architect of uncompromising integrity," Abernathy declared, raising his voice slightly. "But the transfer is not simple. It is contingent upon a specific, mandatory action required of Julian Thorne himself." This was the core of Elias's revenge, the devastating legal structure that forced Julian to choose between his pride and his fortune. Abernathy paused, letting the suspense crush Julian's hope. "The ownership of the Thorne Tower and its assets shall irrevocably transfer to Dr. Anya Sharma, only upon the contingent condition that Julian Thorne publicly and legally renounce the validity of his architectural license, acknowledging it was obtained by fraudulent means, and issuing a public apology for misrepresenting his professional credentials to the firm and the world." The silence was absolute. Serafina gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. Julian stared, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. He hadn't just lost the tower, he was being forced to admit to the core, professional lie that underpinned his entire adult life. His license, obtained years ago through a scheme involving compromised testing scores and fabricated internship hours, a secret only Elias had known, was his single greatest vulnerability. No, that's insane, Julian whispered, shaking his head rapidly. That's professional suicide. He can't force me to do that. It voids my career. It's an invalid punitive clause. It is a valid condition precedent, Julian, Abernathy corrected, pulling out a printout of the hidden recording. And I have here, on this document, proof of your attempted felony, an audio and visual recording of you, in this office 2 nights ago, openly discussing the forgery of your father's signature and boasting about your control over the fraudulent transfer, and demonstrating the use of the forging pen. That recording, combined with your father's immediately failing health today, proves the fraudulent compromise of his assets, thus triggering the codicil. Abernathy placed the printout on the glass table. You have 2 choices, Julian. 1. You can fight the codicil in probate court. I will then immediately submit this evidence of forgery and your fraudulent license to the state licensing board and the district attorney. You will lose the tower, face criminal charges, and have your license revoked publicly and humiliatingly. Or, Abernathy continued, his voice softer, yet terrifyingly firm. 2. You can fulfill the condition precedent. You can issue the public renouncement and apology. If you do this, you lose your career and your reputation, but you avoid jail time, and the tower transfers cleanly to Dr. Sharma. The choice is between utter destruction with criminal charges, or total professional ruin with a sliver of dignity. Serafina began to scream, her voice high-pitched and raw. You ruined us. We lose everything. The tower, the money, the house. All because of some artistic integrity clause? Julian didn't hear her. He was staring at the recording transcript, his eyes fixed on the evidence that sealed his fate. He realized his father, the brilliant architect, had not just written a will, he had built a perfect, inescapable legal structure designed for a single occupant, his greedy, fraudulent son. Suddenly, a knock echoed at the office door. Abernathy opened it, and a striking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes stood in the doorway, Dr. Anya Sharma. She looked utterly bewildered, holding a small travel bag. Mr. Abernathy? I'm here. You said you needed me for an archival consultation on the tower's early designs? Julian saw Anya, the protégé he had maliciously undercut and destroyed years ago to hide his own lack of talent, standing in the doorway, now about to receive the tower he had just risked everything to steal. The sheer symmetry of Elias's revenge was crushing. He had not just lost his inheritance, he had given it to the very person he had wronged. The sight of Dr. Anya Sharma, the woman Julian Thorne had systematically and maliciously forced out of the industry years ago, standing calmly in the doorway was the final, devastating blow. Julian didn't see an archival consultant, he saw the living, breathing symbol of his own ethical failure, now poised to receive the magnificent legacy he had tried to steal. Serafina was sobbing hysterically, clinging to Julian's arm. Do something, Julian. Tell him this is illegal. Tell them about your license, you can't just throw away your career. We have nothing without your name. Julian shoved her away. He looked wildly around the office, at the blueprint of the tower, at the motionless body of his father, at the resolute face of Mr. Abernathy, and finally, at the printout detailing his whispered confession of forgery. The reality was a crushing weight. He could not fight. To fight was to invite the police, the district attorney, and a complete, irreversible criminal collapse that would also destroy Serafina's family connections. He chose ruin over incarceration. The condition, Julian choked out, his voice raw. The condition is met. I will do it. I will renounce the license. Abernathy offered a sharp, dry nod. A prudent choice. The public statement must be issued immediately, Julian. It must be legally comprehensive, covering your fraudulent acquisition of the license and your misrepresentation of credentials during your tenure at Thorne Architecture. As Abernathy prepared the official statement for Julian's immediate digital release to the architectural press, Julian stood trembling, his entire identity dissolving. The great architect, the man who was meant to carry the Thorne legacy, was reduced to a defeated liar. He picked up his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely tap the screen. It was at that moment, as Julian was about to destroy his life for a building he no longer owned, that the man in the leather armchair stirred. Elias Thorne, who minutes earlier had been declared incapacitated or dead, executed the final, most stunning phase of his plan. He let out a low, theatrical groan, followed by a sudden, sharp inhalation of breath. His eyes fluttered open, clear and sharp, fixed directly on his son. The office erupted in a wave of disbelief. Serafina's hysterical sobs cut off mid-wail. Julian dropped his phone, the screen shattering on the floor, the renunciation statement unsent. "Good heavens!" Abernathy exclaimed, playing his part perfectly, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Elias! You're alive!" Elias pushed himself upright, his movements surprisingly strong, fueled by cold, hard adrenaline. He looked directly at Julian, who staggered backward, staring at his father as if he had risen from the dead. "I am perfectly well, Julian," Elias stated, his voice weak but filled with devastating clarity. "I merely suffered a temporary exhaustion, brought on by the immense moral strain of having to listen to my own son announce my death and boast about his felony attempts at theft." He motioned to Abernathy. The doctor, the notary, the transfer, the staged incapacitation, it was all a prearranged performance, George. Designed to ensure Julian committed his final, irrevocable act of betrayal after the legal transfer, thus triggering the codicil. Elias leaned forward, resting his hands on the chair arms, projecting the full weight of his disappointment onto Julian. "You didn't just try to steal my money, Julian. You tried to erase my life's philosophy. You are not an architect. You are a glorified accountant who fraudulently bought his way into a profession that demands integrity. The Thorne Tower, my greatest work, cannot be managed by a fake. And I have just ensured it never will be." A profound wave of guilt and failure washed over Julian. He was not just disinherited, he was publicly, professionally, and paternally cast out, all while his father watched, very much alive. He understood now the true cruelty of the codicil. It was designed to deny him not just the money, but the identity he had fabricated. Elias then turned his attention to Dr. Anya Sharma. "Anya. Welcome back. I trust you heard the conditions. The Thorne Tower is yours. You earned the legacy years ago with your honesty, and now it is finally being rewarded. Julian's attempts to ruin you are now his undoing." Anya, who was still processing the whirlwind of events, Elias's death, his return, the forgery, the $100 million skyscraper, took a hesitant step forward. Her eyes were fixed on Elias with deep, complex emotion. Elias concluded the confrontation with chilling finality, addressing Julian and Serafina one last time. "You are no longer welcome in this house, nor in any structure bearing the Thorne name. You have inherited the professional shame you earned. Mr. Abernathy will ensure you are escorted from the premises immediately. Your career is over, and your bank accounts are empty." Julian, utterly broken, didn't argue. He only offered a faint, horrified nod, comprehending the totality of his loss. He took Serafina's arm, pulling her away from the shattered glass of the phone screen, and stumbled toward the exit. The great architect's son left the office not with an inheritance, but with the empty promise of ruin. With Julian and Serafina gone, expelled from the penthouse and barred from the Thorne premises by Abernathy's swift legal action, a profound silence settled over the office. The air, thick with the tension of betrayal, began to clear. Elias, though weakened by the performance, felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in months. He was free. He had fought not just for his money, but for the sanctity of his life's work. Dr. Anya Sharma remained standing near the doorway, still holding her travel bag, her expression evolving from shock to dawning comprehension. She looked at Elias, the man who had been her mentor, then her adversary, thanks to Julian's schemes, and now her savior. "Mr. Thorne," Anya finally said, her voice steady. "The Thorne Tower, it's the most important work of postmodern architecture in the city. I don't understand why me. And why such extreme conditions on Julian? Elias smiled faintly. Because you are the only person who understands that a building is a structure of integrity, not just profit. You were destroyed by Julian for valuing honesty over shortcuts. My conditions were necessary because Julian had to choose between his biggest lie, his license, and his biggest theft, the tower. I forced him to destroy the one thing that defined his fraudulent identity. He now has nothing left to sell. He reached out a frail hand to Mr. Abernathy. George, ensure Julian's immediate, public renouncement of his license is circulated to every major media outlet and architectural review board. The legal exposure must be complete. Abernathy nodded, already tapping commands into his phone. It's being processed now, Elias. Julian Thorne is professionally finished. The new legacy. Over the next few months, Elias began his true recovery. He moved out of the vast penthouse and into a small, sunlit studio apartment with views of the park, taking only his most cherished drafting instruments and a few pieces of art. The wealth was no longer a burden, it was a tool for justice. Anya Sharma, now the sole owner of the Thorne Tower and the head of the revitalized Thorne architecture firm, fulfilled the legacy Elias had intended. She immediately cancelled the proposed structural modernization and instead focused on restoring the building's original artistic vision, investing the profits back into community art projects and a mentorship program for disadvantaged, talented architecture students. The Thorne Tower became a symbol not of commercial greed but of artistic redemption. Anya established the Elias Thorne Foundation for Architectural Integrity, ensuring that Elias's name would forever stand for ethical practice and uncompromising design principles. Julian and Serafina were never heard from again in high society circles. Stripped of his license and facing multiple lawsuits, Julian was forced to take a job far removed from the city, managing a small, obscure property portfolio for a distant relative, a life of quiet, perpetual failure. Serafina filed for divorce, her dreams of inheriting opulence crushed by her husband's career suicide. Their inheritance was a lifetime of public shame and professional ruin. Elias, receiving regular reports and visiting the newly vibrant Thorne Tower lobby, found a final, profound peace. He had spent his life building structures, but his final, most enduring creation was the structural integrity of his own moral justice. He had successfully designed the perfect, elegant trap to defend his legacy and reward the integrity of his most loyal student. He had proven that the strongest blueprint is always drawn with truth. A message from Elias Thorne. This was a story of genius planning and devastating consequence, proving that true wealth lies not in assets, but in the structural integrity of your character. My moral for this story is simple: never underestimate the vigilance of the person you betray. And remember, a foundation built on fraud will always, eventually, collapse. If this tale of high-stakes legal revenge, architectural passion, and absolute justice resonated with you, please give this video a like and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories of shocking payback and moral reckoning. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think Julian's final, humiliating job was after he lost his license? Share your ideas in the comments below. Until next time, build your life on solid ground.